It is my true honor and pleasure to have Rabbi Tovia Singer again on the show. Hi and welcome to my podcast, The World of Wojciechowicz, when I host and speak with the most interesting people from all around the world to discuss science, religion, theology, Judaism, artificial intelligence, and more. If you love this type of conversations, please consider subscribing, hit the bell button, and you can buy the books, donate Bitcoins, whatever you feel obliged to do. Now, Rabbi Tovia Singer dedicated his life to unveiling the lies and manipulation of both Christian missionaries and the Christian scriptures themselves. Here are some of the topics he deals with on a regular basis. Calling out missionaries posing as Orthodox Jew, and we will discuss it in length shortly. Showing how Christian scripture distort Jewish scripture and practices, defending the holiness of the oral law, what we call the Torah Shebe'al Peh, and dealing with Christian blended idolatry, which is Avodat Elilim, and I probably said it wrong, and talking with converted Jews who return to Judaism. Well, Rabbi, your work is both important and impressive, and many thanks for what you do on a regular basis. Many thanks.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
My pleasure. So let's start. We just after Christmas and before New Year's Eve, and Christmas is the birth of Jesus, and the Brit was on January 4th. So let's start with your permission with the historical Jesus. And I heard the lecture of you a few months ago dealing with this very topic. Now, many secular Jews believe, and I want to use your word here, that Jesus was misunderstood, that he was a nice hippie guy that spoke against the corruption of the priest, and he didn't mean to establish a new religion. Okay, so there is an historical figure named Jesus, according 0 BC, and he was just a nice guy, and you can see this image in The Life of Brian by Monty Python. So I can understand why converted Jews or Christian that converted to Judaism want to think like this, but what is the problem with this line of thought?
Yeah, Christianity has an enormous burden because it claims that it is the fulfillment of Judaism. It's interesting that what you had said is that there are thoughts, there are some people who think that Jesus was a hippie in the Galilee and just completely misunderstood. And then other people feel like he never started his own religion, which is an interesting knach, an interesting rub here, because as it turns out, the fundamentalist Christians insist, in fact, the very Christian canon states that Jesus didn't start a new religion, but he is the fulfillment of the Old Testament, Luke 24:44, that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. John 5:46, if you would have believed in Moses, you would have believed in me, for he wrote about me. 2 Timothy 3:16. So all over the Christian Bible, we are told by its authors that Christianity, that word Christianity does never appears in the Christian Bible. We're just using that because that's the conventional term. That Christianity is in fact the fulfillment of Judaism. And therefore, it is making a highly falsifiable claim. It's a fantastic claim. Fantastic claims require fantastic evidence. But when you claim that the Hebrew Bible is the Word of God, which the Christians do, and the Protestants believe that only the 39 books of Tanakh, which are really 24 books, that's it for the Hebrew Bible, then you're making claims that are either truth claims that are highly falsifiable, and that's exactly what's going on. Christmas, incidentally, is not mentioned anywhere in the Christian Bible. Chanukah is, in John chapter 10, verse 22. Chanukah is there, Christmas is not. It's not an accident that Christmas is December 25th and Chanukah is the 25th day of Kislev. This is not an accident. In Jewish tradition, the idea of kindling a fire goes back to the ancient part of human civilization as a monotheistic act at a time when the world was, when it got darker outside for much longer, nights were long, days shorter, and then the pagans misappropriated this. That's why in Josephus, when describing Chanukah, Josephus tells us that 3 years before Chanukah, which means on the 25th day of Kislev, but 3 years before the rebellion was successful and the rededication took place, Antiochus Epiphanes IV slaughtered a pig on the altar on the 25th day of Kislev. So it was really a rededication of Chanukah, of saying, no, we're taking back the light, which was always monotheistic. This goes back to a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, very famous. By the way, I'll tell you one other thing that's really wild. Okay, just really wild. So right, so if Christmas, now Christmas is really an ancient pagan holiday. The winter solstice, the days are finally getting longer, nights are shorter. So it's the victory of the sun god, Sol Invictus. But here's the crazy thing. You're right. So if Christmas is the day he was born, then New Year's will be the day of his circumcision. January 1st will be the day of his circumcision. What people don't get is, how did April 1st come to be April Fool's Day? Now here the math gets a little trickier. Not that much, it's a drop.
9 months back, and this is the
April 1st is how many days before Christmas? It's exactly 270 days. Do the math. So now how long is Yarchei Leda? How long is the average gestation period of a woman? 270 days in the Talmud, which is exactly 9 months. So if you go back 9 months, exactly, bidiyuk, exactly from December 25th, walk it back, you get to April Fool's Day. You think he was conceived to a virgin, April Fools.
By the way, I checked for, I know this story about April Fools, and I tried to find other references, and I searched in Wikipedia. I didn't find a reference for April Fool in this context, but I'm very familiar with the story. Nevertheless, you make a clear distinction between the New Testament and Paulus, Petrus, and Jesus. But again, do we need, let me ask it differently. Is the question of historical Jesus is it important to us as Jews, or is just as important as a scientific or academic inquiry?
Yeah, so it's not important just theologically at all. There's only one question. Even Christians would concede this point. This is non-controversial. That means people are interested in theology, just like they're interested in God. There's only one question. Is Jesus the Messiah? And in Christian terms, Messiah means something very different. It means he's God, the second person of triune God. Well, that's really important. If he's the Messiah, then it's really important to follow him. If he's not, it doesn't make a difference if he worked in, on a grill in McDonald's. Just who he really is, if he's not the Messiah, is not relevant. Just as if Muhammad wasn't the prophet, then it's not really important who he was. It's only important if Krishna was not a deity, and then it doesn't make a difference. It's irrelevant. So theologically, the only question is, did Jesus fulfill the messianic prophecies that we all know of? Isaiah chapter 2, that describes it'll come to pass at the end of days that the house of the Lord will be raised above all the mountains and above all the hills, and all the nations will flow to it, and he will give and he'll give rebuke to the nations, and the nations will take their swords and spears and turn them into plowshares and pruning hooks. Verse 4. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will learn of war anymore. Is there a more famous, a more static messianic prophecy than world peace and the worldwide knowledge of God, and all the nations are streaming Naharu. In fact, the English term stream comes from Isaiah chapter 2. This is so clear that even the United Nations, it's not my favorite institution in the world, the United Nations on First Avenue and 42nd Street has called the Isaiah Wall, where this is up there. Now, there's nothing Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, out of Zion goes forth the law. That they don't put up. It doesn't make a difference. The point is, this is the most famous messianic prophecy, worldwide knowledge of God and the end of war. Is it an accident that this chapter never is quoted in the Christian Bible? It's not. It appears nowhere. This is like everybody knows this. You don't need to be a scholar and expert for this. Everybody knows the end of war. War comes to an end. People change the implements of war and they turn them into implements of agriculture. Nation will not lift up sword against nation. The reason it's not quoted in the Christian Bible is because Jesus didn't do a thing. There's nothing remotely resemble this. In fact, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34 through 36, think not that I come to bring peace on earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but the sword, to set a man against his own family. In fact, a man's enemies will be those of his own household. That's in the Christian Bible. So it's the, as they say in Yiddish, is punkt verkehrt. It's exactly the opposite. Of course, Christianity brought us no peace. The bloodiest human war, in the bloodiest religious war in human history, was in fact fought between, it was an intra-Christian war between 1618 and 1648. So therefore it's called the 30-Year War, where Christians eviscerated the Holy Roman Empire, Germany destroyed, and 8 million people left dead. So there's Christianity. So there's nothing remotely resembling messianic prophecy. It's not like this is a tough call. This is not a strike or a ball in baseball. The Christian claims bear no resemblance to anything found in Tanakh, and in fact, the core teachings of the church that are strikingly unique are opposed by the Hebrew Bible.
And in our last conversation, you said that the Judeo-Christian tradition is basically a Judeo tradition that was adopted without our permission by Christianity. So you said that you don't like the term Judeo-Christian because...
No, I hate it.
Because
it's fake. It's ecumenical. It's fine. If you just want to get along, it's fine.
But with your permission, I want to stick to this point a little bit more, because again, we know that there is a question, a very fundamental question in modern archaeology, whether David was David. Is there a kingdom that became big after one generation, David and then Solomon? And this is a very important question in modern archaeology. And we have the Finkelstein School, and we have the Hebrew University School, and the concept of the historical David, the historical Solomon, and even the historical Jesus can be profoundly important. And if you say, listen, I know that Jesus was some guy in Galilee, but from what I know from his writing, from what I know from the stories in the Talmud, from the story in the New Testament, I know that his philosophy, because many secular Jews that watching us right now, or even secular Christians, say, okay, I don't believe that he was actually the Messiah. I don't believe that he was God, but he was the originator, he was the founder of a giant religion, of a giant philosophy. And if we look at the essence as the building blocks of this philosophy, it is tremendously different than the philosophy of Judaism, okay? And like world peace against, I came to separate a guy from his family. So again, it for me boils down again to the question of the historical Jesus.
We're dealing with a problem. You're a scientist, you know this. The problem is there's a dearth of evidence. The problem is there's an absence of information because it is inconvenient that not a single non-Christian wrote about Jesus until 112. There are some theories that hold that Josephus, at the end of the first century, wrote a paragraph about Jesus. This is extremely controversial in Antiquities 1833. In fact, everyone agrees it's a corruption. The question is, was it completely made up, called Testimonium Flavium? Josephus was born in 37, so he was not a contemporary of Jesus. He was born after Christians concede that Jesus was crucified. So there really is, we have a zero. We have Pliny the Younger is our first certain mention by a non-Christian about Jesus. And Pliny the Younger wasn't even discussing Jesus. He was discussing Christians gathering illegally for prayer services, which was against the law in the empire. And then Tacitus in 114 is just telling us that Nero executed Christians, blamed them for burning down Rome. So there, all you can do is you can look for, using very weak methods. I mean, this would never work in the sciences, in the hard sciences, where you can replicate and duplicate. It is all very soft. So all we can do is we use criteria. That means I want to just pose this for you, the viewer. How, when looking at any ancient document, would you know that the person who it is claimed to have written it actually wrote it? Like how? Like, how do you know? Let's take a very controversial book. I just need to give you an example, okay? We can even take a very, like Daniel. Like, how would you know if Daniel wrote Daniel during the Babylonian exile? Okay, that's, I'm steel manning this. Well, what we'd like is like an eyewitness to Daniel. That would be very nice, who spoke about Daniel. We would like a disinterested witness, okay? We actually have that. We have 3 mentions of Daniel in Ezekiel. We also would like someone living about the Maccabee period who says that Daniel lived a long time ago. We have that in 1 Maccabees, chapter 2, verse 55 through 60. We'd like whoever wrote the book of Daniel to be very concerned about issues that would apply 2,500 years ago. That means these are the rigorous methods that we find in Tanakh. In the Christian Bible, what you look for is criteria of embarrassment. Are there things in the New Testament that are embarrassing? You could perhaps say that being executed by crucifixion which was very embarrassing. It was just, that might be satisfying. These are not strong. You definitely could say there was a person named Paul who could not get along with Barnabas, who could not get along with John Mark, who could not get along with Peter, and that's why we have their fights in the New Testament. So but that criteria of embarrassment is very, very rigorous, very strong.
But if you apply those very techniques to the life of David, to the life of Solomon, wouldn't you get basically the same thing?
No, you get the reverse. That's the beauty. The beauty is this is pure algebra. You can simply, you can literally throw in the same numbers and come out the exact opposite. Because what do we find about King Solomon? All you have to do is read 1 Kings. Embarrassment, embarrassment, embarrassment. He becomes king, and suddenly he's marrying all these wives, and they bring idolatry. Like, who would write that about, like, our favorite King David? Who would put in the most embarrassing event with Bathsheba and Abigail? That's like, someone would invent that. That means we find David committing sins that are so egregious that you or I never did stuff like that. I mean, we're talking about whatever the Chazal, the rabbis have a little explanation to, but let's just take the plain text. I mean, this person who is King David, incidentally, is mentioned in Tanakh more frequently than anyone else, more than Moses, over 1,000 times. So here is the hero of the Jewish people, commits adultery, has a really inappropriate conversation with Abigail, right? Who he basically commits mass murder, because not only does he have Uriah, a convert to Judaism, who's a really nice guy, but a whole bunch of other people killed. So that's the point. The point is apply the same algorithm, and you have the exact opposite. Now, I don't want to get into the archaeology Taldan. We can if you want to. Finkelstein didn't. but I want to just apply this. That's right. Apply the same methodology. Let's be equal. And we come up with a completely opposite result. You know, there's a joke. It's this old line my Rebbe used to say, that Tanakh was either written by God or was written by an anti-Semite.
And again, I want just to strengthen your point, but Paro is the savior, the rescue of Moses, and she's like the bat of the daughter of Pharaoh. It's like the daughter of Hitler that saved the Jewish people.
Right.
So
right.
So let me ask two questions. From all the books that was published about Jesus in the last 100 years by Jewish scholars, including Joseph Klausner, Jesus by David Plusar, and the Mishpato Umoto Shel Yeshu HaNotzri, the trial and death of Jesus. So all of those books basically has no solid ground to based on, because the most early documentation of Jesus is just 100 years after his death.
Look, I want to talk to you. You and me have to have a conversation. I'm on air a lot, so I'm going to do this with you. You know, I'm not a scientist in the hard science. I'm not at all. But there's a reason why in archaeology you have people with PhDs, right, who widely disagree, and we can pretty much predict who's going to come up with this idea and who's going with that, and who's the minimalist and who's not. Why? If it's science, if it really is science, why are these same characters coming up over and over again that say this and the same? You don't find that like in pathology, doing blood tests. You either have COVID or you don't have COVID. I mean, everybody knows that people have a dog in this race, and that's why you're getting such different results. And people really refuse to apologize. Now, Klausner was a genius, a brilliant mind. But basically him, Flusser, they had a narrative in mind, and God blessed them with brilliant minds. And then they went to the text and they looked for, this is a very key word, it's actually two words called verisimilitude. Verisimilitude, two Latin words, it means what it sounds like. It's something that is similar to the Jewish Pharisaic world, and those things in the Christian Bible that match with what we would expect a Jewish man who is from a Pharisaic world in the Upper Galilee, those things that match will embrace it. So we like Matthew 5:17, the Sermon on the Mount. Verily I say to you, I didn't come to change the law, but to fulfill the law. And anyone who changes one jot or tittle of the law will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven, unless your righteousness exceeds the Pharisees. The Pharisees, if you didn't get the memo, in the Christian Bible, although they're hated, they are considered the gold standard by everybody as being, that's the standard. The Pharisees, those that believe in the written law, oral law, they sit in the seat of Moses, Matthew 23.
Just a second, could you say the Pharisees in Hebrew, just to know that we are on the same?
Right, so the Perushim, the word Perushim, we actually, even though this is an anachronism, which means people don't use this term, you, the viewer, must know like this.
Tzdokim versus Tzdokim?
Right. So,
okay.
But so we need to just...
How you call them in
Pharisees,
okay.
The Greek.
So I just...
Right. So it's a Greek transliteration. Okay. I just want the viewer not to be confused. The Pharisees are exactly Orthodox Judaism. You have to just get that straight. That means those who believe in the written and oral Torah believe in the text and the Misorah, that which is handed down. Now, the term Orthodox Judaism is only a couple centuries old. It wasn't even invented by a Jew, but that's conventional. We're all using, language that we can all say. So Pharisee means Orthodox Judaism, that stream of Judaism that's unbroken. The Sadducees disappeared. They don't exist anymore. They disappeared after the destruction of the Second Temple. The Sadducees didn't believe in the oral Torah. They didn't believe in Tchiat HaMesim, the physical resurrection of the dead. They were very much corrupt by the Romans. So the Pharisees were the rabbis. They had, according to Josephus, and all sources, they had the hearts of the people. So I just want to what Klausner is doing, I mean, I enjoyed so much from him. And what they did, and Flusser was a religious Jew, was they had a narrative, and it's understandable why they would have that premise, is because we'd like to think that this thing was all Jewish and we could all get along. A lot of people did this. Let's all get along. Jesus was just completely misunderstood. It's an effort at ecumenical, but this is not science. And then looking through the Christian Bible, sifting through it, scouring it, and every text that could possibly comport to that a priori idea, we then accept, and everything else we just act as Muslims do and just reject it because it's not consistent with the narrative. That's not science. They're brilliant people. I don't want to take it away, and they're not alive, so I really don't.
No, because this is a big claim, a big,
of course,
I would say a big accusation, because and of course that I cannot support either one of those, but it's a big issue, and I will definitely agree with you that that archaeology and history are not hard sciences. So you could start with your own opinion, your own view on reality and philosophy, and start from there and get to very different trajectories. So
I just want to just tell you, there's a reason why these ideas come up in recent centuries, very recent. We talked about the 30-year war. The 30-year war had an enormous impact on the way people thought about religion, and none of it was good. We think of the Enlightenment as a good thing, but as far as religion goes, it wasn't a good thing. That's why in the 18th and 19th century, we see this explosion of material that is just hitting religion hard. Christianity gets the bulk of it. So there is a new idea that becomes very attractive, and that is Christians had it all wrong. And you have the work of Albert Schweitzer, who was, in my view, the brightest New Testament scholar in the first part of the 20th century, genius. So these ideas influence them, but there's an enlightenment going on. Can we get rid of the miracles? See, the point is not science, because this is a religion that's making religious claims. But I understand them. They're saying, can we just have a Jefferson Bible, which he cut out all the miracles, and can we try to get back to the quest for the original Jesus? If you're not writing a book like that, no one's interested. And then that's easy. So then you can simply go through the text and say, this could fit that, but that's not science. Brilliant, but it ain't science. What I do when people come to me is they're saying, show it to me, prove it to me. So, and then you have what's called post-Auschwitz theology. Because if I didn't say this, I really would not be fair to your viewers. Post-Auschwitz theology is a term used to essentially explain what I think you have a feeling is. It means after the Shoah, Christianity started to rethink itself. The Nazis emerged and reigned in Christian countries, not Buddhist countries. Okay,
Protestant countries.
Right. Well, Germany, but they did very well with the Slavs.
Many people say that there is a great work of Rivka Schechter, the theological roots of the Third Reich, and what she claims is that basically the Luther saying that nothing important in the physical world, just your belief, and even good actions won't set you free. This is the basic soil to produce nothing theology.
Look, let me just blow your viewers away. When Streicher was on trial in Nuremberg, Streicher was not accused or convicted of killing anybody. He was the editor of the Stürmer, which facilitated a propaganda that made the Holocaust possible. And when Streicher, in his own defense, said that there is nothing that I wrote in the Stürmer that Luther had not written earlier. This is not some conspiracy theory. Luther was a grotesque anti-Semite. Ugly. It's like you don't even hear the Ku Klux Klan talking this way. He was a pretty ugly man. He was like like Freud was not the kind of guy you'd want to have dinner with. He just was an unpleasant person as a human being. So Luther was this horribly disgusting, vile hater. I mean, there's no tongue that uttered more curses against the Jewish people. But the Catholic Church also, they entered into a diplomatic relation with Hitler. Paul Johnson, an important historian, not Jewish. So he tells us, we know this, that during the World War II, 65% of Germans were Lutherans, 35% were Roman Catholics. He points out, and he's a Catholic himself, he points out that actually 55% of the SS were Roman Catholics. It's striking, isn't it, that Goebbels, the only member of the circle of Hitler, was the only one excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church. And why was she excommunicated?
Because he married a Jewish woman.
No, she was a Protestant.
No.
She was a Protestant.
A Protestant woman.
Right. He married a Protestant. He married a. Let me just say this to you, my friend. You can't even make this stuff up. Mark Twain said it well, but history is so crazy that you couldn't make this up. And if you dared, you would be put in an insane asylum to come up with this stuff. But Goebbels is excommunicated, not for crimes against humanity. No. Marrying a Protestant, that's enough. So it is that kind of these ideas that are found in the Christian Bible that make the Shoah possible. The whole notion, reading Mein Kampf, and I read it 3 times to write my books, I went through it. It's all the Jews control the world. It's all the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, written early 20th century by Nikolai II, by his secret police. Same idea. The Jews control everyone. We control Pontius Pilate and his wife. We had Jesus crucified. We are the ones of the Bolsheviks. We are the ultimate, we're the enemy of mankind. We control the banks. We control now Hollywood. We control presidents and leaders. We control the Senate and Congress. The Jews are in control. This is a totally different kind of racism than we find in any other people. We do not have a monopoly on being hated, but there is a unique type of hatred of the Jew. The Jew is not hated for being stupid or subhuman. It's quite the contrary. They're too clever. In fact, they're as smart as the devil. In fact, they are Satan himself.
And I would even argue and add a little bit more that the roots for this distinction between the consequences of Jewish philosophy and Christian philosophy is the existence of mitzvot ma'asiyot, of things that you need to do. And if Christianity cancels the mitzvot ma'asiyot, the things that you need to do, and belief is the only way to redemption, so nothing matters. So you can have a Platonic kind of view where the body doesn't influence the mind or the soul. And therefore you can do whatever you want in the physical world as long as you believe. Would you agree?
Yes. In fact, I'll take it to the sciences. So the Christian world was very much the Greek world. In the Greek world, the celestial and the terrestrial are completely, utterly incompatible. You know about this as a scientist. They saw the Greeks saw the celestial world as something perfect. They marveled at the movement of the planets and how perfect it was. And in contrast, they looked around about them and they saw death, despair, broken wagons and dead horses, and people suffering from things that were inexplicable, earthquakes and volcanoes, which they couldn't possibly explain. So they saw the celestial world and the terrestrial world as utterly incompatible. The Greeks thought the Jews were insane for believing in Tchiat HaMesim and the resurrection of the dead. Paul hated that, in fact, claimed that Jesus only resurrected spiritually, 1 Corinthians 15, not physically. That's a completely Greek idea. The Greeks had respect for the Jews, but the one thing they could not swallow was that the Jews believed in the physical resurrection as bothered them. And this idea that, in fact, the terrestrial and celestial are completely connected got Galileo thrown in prison. Because when he said when you have these scientists saying you can actually throw something at a velocity fast enough where it just won't land, what do you mean? That means you're connecting the two. And that's what Judaism always was. You know, in the Torah, the most ecstatic dream is the one of Jacob, our father of blessed memory, where he sees a ladder that connects heaven and earth, and God figuratively is at the top, angels going up and down. The point about Jacob's dream that's so transcendent in Judaism, that's so perfect, is that the heaven and earth are in fact completely connected. Joseph's dreams was problematic. Joseph was either dreaming of stars and moons and sun and the celestial bodies in the sky, or dreaming of bags of wheat on the ground, not connected. The brothers saw that they were unconnected, but Jacob was perfect. Judaism always teaches that what you do before you eat, make a bracha, take wine, bless it, raise it up. Don't abstain from wine. Make a blessing over it. Know that a grape is a very special thing. The vine has no purpose. Only the grape does. When you're intimate with someone, make sure it's your wife, not somebody else's wife. Raise the physical to the spiritual. That's what Judaism is about. In Christianity, they're incompatible. That's why Paul says very proudly that he was celibate and he was a virgin. He didn't want to sleep with any woman. And he encouraged in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, read it for yourself. He says, look, if a husband and wife, if you're married, so be good to your wife, be good to each other. But if you're a virgin, it's best to be like me, best to remain a virgin. And then he says these incredible words. He says, but if your passions are too strong, if your Yetzer Hara is too great, he said, then get married, because it's better to be married than to burn. Could you imagine that? It's 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 8, 9. I mean, a person, I think, watching me now is going, I can't believe that's in the Christian Bible. This is why people think that Jesus never got married or had children. Like, why do they think that? It's not in the New Testament. There's no mention at all in the Christian Bible if Jesus had a wife. Why do they automatically assume that? And they all do in the academic world as well. Like, why? And I can give you reasons why I would think he probably was married. I'm not going to go into it now. But it's because we're all infected by the stench of Christianity. This is why the hard science is so nice. You can replicate, duplicate, peer review. In this area, all you can do is use a priori ideas, accept those that fit it. And of course, nothing against Finkelstein, but everyone has a worldview narrative and therefore falls on a different side. Embrace certain ideas and reject others that don't fit your narrative. We know how it works.
Wow. So with your permission, let's move on to, we need to think about it, but with your permission, let's move on to something that you deal a lot with, and you do deal a lot with, and this is your work with missionaries. And you debate missionaries on a regular basis. And so the first question is, could you please point out a couple of claims or arguments that are most shocking to their ears?
Oh, the claim that your Bible, Doctor, Roe, open your own scripture, Hebrew Bible, and Jesus is there on every page. And the reason you don't see it is you're blind. There's a veil over your eyes. There are scales over your eyes. If you think I'm like making this up because I don't want to characterize Christianity in a way that's charitable, that's 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Excuse me, 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Like, I'm not making any of this up. This is right there, black, literally on white. The idea that read your own scripture, Jesus is there. And what we find is when we actually go, okay, we'll look it up. What we find is not only doesn't it say that, but this is scandal. Like, you made it up. Like, Matthew claims that Jesus was born of a virgin. The idea that Jesus was born of a virgin is only made in 2 books of the Christian Bible, Matthew and Luke. Matthew takes the extra, he has the audacity to say this is a fulfillment of what it says in Isaiah. And then he proceeds to quote Isaiah. behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, look it up. So any normal person will go, all right, let's look it up. And then we come to our verse in Isaiah chapter 7:14. And we come to a verse that says, Hine ha'alma hora v'yeledes bein, behold, the young woman is pregnant, and she will bear a son, v'karat, and she will call his name Emmanuel. Every part of that entire passage was completely raped. You heard those words, molest. I'm using strong words because that's what happened here. This is not a figurative anything. This is a scandal. This is the kind of thing that if you would do on your doctoral dissertation, not you, if some student did to get a PhD at Hebrew University and got caught doing something like this, you would get thrown out of the university, and you can get thrown in jail if you were a lawyer pulling this kind of chicanery with contracts. And the word there, a key word there is alma, which means young woman. The text actually says ha-alma, which means the young woman. This is a definite article. Matthew changes it and translates it as, behold, a virgin, indefinite article. There's only one way to say virgin in Hebrew, only one, in both biblical and modern Hebrew, betula. There's no other way to say it. Moreover, I wanted to, by the way, for you, the viewer, who's wondering, well, how do I know? I don't speak Hebrew like the both of you. How do I know? Maybe you Jews just don't like Christianity. You made that up. So I want to do this. For those of you who are not erudite in Hebrew and like, how do you know? I'm not going to tell you look it up in the dictionary, like who did the dictionary. Listen, if the word alma meant a virgin, all you'd have to do is look at other places in Tanakh where that same exact word appears, and we should find it to be always speaking about virgins. And by the way, virginity is really important in Tanakh. That it just was an important concept. So this is going to be really easy. So it turns out, for example, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 30, verse 19, it says, Hine derech gevel ba'alma, the way of a man with an alma. And it's talking about an adulterous woman, that they commit fornication. And then she washes herself and then says, I didn't do anything wrong because she took a bath. I mean, that King David in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 56, is called an Elam, which is the masculine version of Alma. Was King David too a virgin? How ridiculous. So this is really a crime against the text. This is deliberate. This was not a mistake. And this is done not in one place, not in 10, but in hundreds of places throughout Tanakh. And this is why, my friends, that Christians around the world go to school, church schools, and are never taught biblical Hebrew until they're adults. And then if they wish, they could study biblical Hebrew, and they're 20 years old. And there are many foreign students here in Israel going to Hebrew University studying biblical Hebrew, but they're fully Christians already. They bought into it. They are deprived of the tools to be able to look this up for themselves as children when language is so easy to acquire. And instead, like, why are you Christian schools in Houston, in London, why are you teaching kids Latin? Like, why is the official religion of the Roman Empire more important than the original language of the Hebrew Bible? It's inconceivable. So that's the one.
According to what you say, it is very conceivable because you don't want to read the Bible in its origin language.
That's exactly correct.
But my question is, how was this sustainable for such a long time? Because my only way of thinking about it is that there was no available Latin interpretation or translation to the Hebrew Bible. Because if there was, so I can just, verify the text with Isaiah and Matthew and say, listen, it's not the same thing. You just corrupted the text. You didn't quote.
Latin won't help you because you're reading Jerome. Jerome wrote in the 5th century. Jerome, by the way, died here in Israel. He died in Beis Lechem, studying Hebrew here in Israel. It means it won't help you to use a translation. They can't have access to the original. The ancient world, people were, Jews, not all, but Jews knew how to pray. Even a Jew who's not the most religious Jew, but they can open a Siddur and pray. In the ancient world, people were completely ignorant, and the church did not teach the original. Do you know that there were, of all the church fathers, do you know how many of them were completely fluent in Hebrew? This is mind-blowing. Two, only two. Origen, a 3rd century church father, and Jerome, who lived in the 4th and 5th century, who rendered the Vulgate, who created the Vulgate. And he studied in Israel for almost over 20 years with rabbis here to study Hebrew so he can create the Vulgate, because he knew the Septuagint was a bunch of nonsense. And he got in a lot of trouble, but he had papal authority and that was fine. But the point is, so what good is it to read the Vulgate? You're reading a human iteration. The original is Hebrew. You know, please, you the viewer, there's nothing I am saying that's controversial. There's no one out there who thinks that the Jewish scriptures was originally written in French. Everybody knows it was originally written in Hebrew with a little Aramaic, which is a sister language. This is not a controversy. No one had access to it. Moreover, one other point that many of the viewers don't realize, unless you're Catholic or you're Orthodox, the nature of the Orthodox Church, the nature of the Roman Catholic Church, is a church service that's highly liturgical, very fixed. Liturgical means that the priest comes on Sunday. You didn't read the Bible on your own. No one did that. What happened was the priests, they were the ones who had knowledge, and they would read sections of the Bible, and that's what you would listen to. You didn't take a Bible home. Forget about the fact that if you couldn't, how would you even get your hands on a Bible? In order to have a Bible in the ancient world, you had to hire someone to write one for you. You had to be a millionaire. I mean, that wasn't, imagine someone to copy the entire Bible by hand. I mean, people don't realize it just wasn't accessible. So imagine you're in the Catholic Church, Orthodox Church. This is before the schism. People didn't go through the Bible. It just wasn't the nature of it. People would pray, they would fast, they would listen to the priest, but they wouldn't be able to have access to the original Hebrew. That was inconceivable.
Okay, so another question regarding some inconceivable things about Christianity is that we teach in our Jewish Hebrew schools, Israel schools, that Jesus is, according to Christianity, the Son of God. But the Trinity itself said something different, that Jesus, the young man that we see inside churches, is actually God itself. According to the Trinity, it is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, three that they are one. And according to Rabbi Uri Sherky, there is a good reason that we don't teach it in our schools. We want to give a less absurd view of Christianity. Would you agree that there is that we don't teach this very truth in our schools, because many Jewish or many Israelis don't know that according to Christianity, Jesus is God?
Right. Many Israelis are not familiar with Christianity because they, it depends where you grew up. But Israelis are generally very unfamiliar with Christianity.
Jesus is the Son of God.
Okay, so this gets complicated, and I've got to explain it. Right. So Christians who believe in the Trinity, that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, so the term Son of God is all over the Christian Bible. Now we have a concept in Tanakh that's all over that to be the Son of God, and you and I are both the Son of God. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 1. Like, you are the son of the Lord your God. Exodus 4:22. Israel is God's son, God's firstborn son. Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. I've got to explain this or I'm going to cheat the viewers. So first, let me just state the facts. Christians say that Jesus is the Son of God. Almost all Christians, not all, but the vast majority of Christians believe in the doctrine of the Trinity, a hypostatic union, which means that Jesus was completely God, 100% God, and 100% human at the very same time. You'll never find that in the Christian Bible. It's just the opposite. In the Christian Bible, Jesus is completely subordinate to the Father, and Jesus can't do anything of his own accord, and Jesus can only do what God sent him to do, John 5:30, and Jesus praying to God and begging God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It's misquoting King David in Psalm chapter 22. Like, why is he crying? Why doesn't he understand? And in Mark chapter 13, when Jesus asks, when is the Achet Hayamim going to occur? He says, nobody knows that, not the Son, not even the angels, only the Father knows that. So the writers of the Christian Bible thought that Jesus was divine, but only to a certain extent. I'll explain that in a moment. So modern Christians, following the Council of Nicaea in 325, believe, this is orthodoxy, that Jesus was completely of the same substance as the Father. Now, many Christians in history said, then why are we using terms like Son and Father? Not many, but a number did, because then what does the word Son mean? You know, there's a Jewish saying that when a word means anything, it means nothing. Then how is the Father and the Son? Like, what does that mean? So earlier Christians believed, this was the argument over, there was a point in time when only God the Father existed, and he caused the Son to come into existence, and therefore the Son would be subordinate. But this was ruled out, and this was the war in the Council of Nicaea. I want to go back to the Son of God. So you have to say that Christians, first I have to lay out, Christians will say, we're taught to believe Jesus is the Son of God, and he is fully God. Okay, one very light of very light. Now I need to explain to you, because this happens very frequently in Judaism and Christianity, and sometimes in Islam, where we're using the same term, but we mean something completely different. In Greek thought, if you were the Son of God, it was like a giraffe has a son, has a baby giraffe. So the baby giraffe, it's a giraffe, but it's not equal to his father, the giraffe, who sired him, because the father horse caused his baby horse, his son horse, to be born. But the son is still a horse, is still a giraffe. In the ancient world, people like Caesar Augustus, Octavius, they weren't conceived to a mother and father. No way. It was the great god Zeus and Jupiter who made Alexander the Great's mother pregnant. Romulus, the founder of Rome, mythical founder of Rome, he wasn't conceived between a man and a woman. He was conceived to a virgin, most of them on December 25th, born on December 25th. Pythagoras, you know who that is. Pythagoras, a thinker like Pythagoras, born to a virgin, it was believed.
But
why?
Alexander the Great had a father, Philippus of Macedonia. So
don't think about those kinds of things. You have to think, don't confuse me with the facts. Alexander the Great was believed to be, the way they thought was there were certain mortals that were just too great to be completely mortal. So therefore, they had they were in between. They had a human mother from who they were born, but they were conceived by the gods. Zeus was very busy doing two things: either running the planets or getting ladies pregnant. Hercules was impregnated by Zeus. This is not complicated. All born of virgins. They were too great to be human. So therefore, in the Jesus case, the idea was that Jesus was half man, half divine in the Christian Bible. And therefore, the Son of God meant that you really were a giraffe, the Son. Now, the idea would later become higher Christology, higher and higher, to the point of Nicaea in 325, where he's completely equal. But that's a development that we see in the canon and develops in the church fathers. Now, in Tanakh, being the Son of God meant that you were doing or capable of performing the work of God on earth. that you were a follower of God, that God was the person, God is the one whom you followed. So Shlomo HaMelech in 2 Samuel chapter 7 is called the son of God. Doesn't mean he was a son of God. The nation of Israel is called God's son in Exodus 4:22, firstborn, because the role of the Jew is to be a light to the nations. So therefore, in Tanakh, we have the same term, but son of God in Tanakh means that you are a person who has a neshama, a soul, a divine soul in you, and you are performing the work for which you were given by the Almighty. Totally different.
Okay, so now we understand, but you still didn't answer my question. Do you think that there is something purpose in our education system, in Ministry of Education nowadays in Israel, that when we teach about Christianity, we don't mention this because we don't want to pupils in Israel say, wow, Christianity is actually pretty dumb?
So you have to understand, you're asking a rabbi this question.
Okay.
And so I'm very straight. In Judaism, we're not interested in foreign religions as a thought. Now, if you ask a secular minister of education that should we learn about world religions, and that's important for people to understand history and sociology and so on. And if you study music, you learn about church music, art. So that's not a religious question. That's a person's opinion if people should learn about all world religions. An atheist can answer that question.
No,
right?
but my question is that in Jewish school, in Jewish secular school, and even in Jewish Orthodox school, we learn about Christianity in history classes, but we learn not the right things in order to make Christianity more appealing and less absurd.
Because because that's the Weltanschauung now. It means the way we all want to be, there's a great word in English, ecumenical. We want everyone to get along fine. And the Christians, I remember when Cardinal Lustiger, who was the Bishop of France, he was a Jew. He's dead, but he was a Jew. He converted when he was a teenager during the Holocaust. So there was a thinking that Lustiger could have been made Pope. And I remember wherever I would go speak, people always say, do you think that Lustiger could become the Pope? And I could, like, Jews would ask me that, like I had access to that information. And like I know, like me and the Vatican, we're in. But
you're part of the secret committee.
He would have not been the first Jewish Pope. But the point is that I see it in the twinkle of the eye of the Jew. I'm doing this 40 years. I've been asked this over and over throughout the years, that there's a twinkle. Wow, if one of our own, we'd go, see that? One of our boys, he made it to the top of his field. And I think that Jews, we do. It's a kind of mentality where we need the approval of the non-Jews to feel good about ourselves. We need the world to move embassies to Jerusalem in order that we feel good. We need, please recognize me. Oh God, Chile just elected a new leader who doesn't like Israel. Oh no, it's a diaspora mentality where we need the affirmation of the nations who persecuted us in the past to feel good. It's a galut mentality.
We are still in diaspora. Let me tell you one thing.
So that's the bottom line. The truth is, this interest in studying about Jesus and his Jewishness, all this stuff is not coming from a healthy place. It's coming from a galut mentality. We all can get along.
Let me tell you just one thing. I don't know how to say it in English, but Shalom Aleichem, the great author, once said, and he wrote like 150 years ago, that if a Jew in Poland wants to say something that is very important and he wants to be considered loyal, he will say, listen, this I heard from a goy. So if he said, listen, this I heard from a goy, so this is a very solid fact. This is what, now, let's move on to
I just want to say this. I have to say this. It was so crazy that when we find out that Chinese love gefilte fish. It's the biggest pleasure in the world. And if the Koreans are studying the Talmud, we get the biggest pleasure in the world. And it's the front page of every newspaper. It's a mentality. So really this emerges not from the healthiest place in the world. Let's go on.
And we have a big debate on tefillin booth for Chabad, but Christmas trees everywhere in Israel are okay. So with your permission, last question regarding your great series about Ishaya, the book of Ishayahu, or Isaiah, I think, in English. So one thing, my friend Ori Kolb said, you publish those videos too slowly. We want every week a new one. So there is one thing that he said, but you explained that our job as Jews is to be light unto the nations. So you show that there is a mystic connection between the Jews and the Goyim. When we turn our backs to God, the Goyim suffer and in turn inflict pain on Jews. Could you please elaborate on this? Because this is mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing, but this is themes not only to Isaiah, but the term Or L'Goyim, a light to nations, only appears in Isaiah in two places, Isaiah 42:6 and 49 verse 6. But the idea is everywhere, that we are to be a mamleches kohanim. Let me explain. The role of the Jewish people is to be a light to the world. That means that the world would see us in our observance of Torah, and it would raise up the nations of the world and bring them closer to God. If you tonight, before you go to sleep, a Jew, say Kriyat Shema, if you as a Jew give charity to a person who's poor, it literally raises up the world. There's nowhere in Tanakh that says the Jews should go out to the nations and hold crusades and do none of that. You keep the mitzvot and it brings light. You know, you take a room that's completely dark, no windows, and you kindle one candle, light one candle, and the light goes all over. And the beautiful thing about light is that unlike a pail of water, why is light used? Why is a fire used? So exquisite. Because if you have one candle, how many other candles can I light with that candle? Infinite. And it never diminishes from the original candle. That means that one candle could light a candle, and it could light another candle. It could light an infinite number of candles. And using also physics, there is a coldest level that is the absolute zero of Kelvin, but there is no limit to how warm you can go. It's unlimited. And what happens is when the Jews fail at their job of being the rabbis of the world, when the Jewish people do not carry out that mandate, what happens? It diminishes from the light. Who's affected by that? The non-Jew, the Gentiles, because they're not getting the light. What do they do in turn? When they don't have the light, they want to go to war with God. They turn against God. But how do you flail your fists against God? You can't go to war with God. That's ridiculous. So instead, you go to war with God's firstborn son, with Israel. And that's why I say to you, I lived 5 years in Indonesia, a part of the world where there's a lot of natural disasters. It's a beautiful place, but there are volcanoes and earthquakes were just routine. Jews generally, if you look at our history, we didn't suffer from natural disasters. In Central America, they do. In Thailand, tsunamis. The Jews, we talk about the suffering of the Jew, every person knows we're talking about anti-Semitism. Why? Not so much tsunamis. No one thinks earthquakes. Doesn't mean there's never been an earthquake here in Israel. There has been, but no one thinks that way. Why? Because it's an unrelenting hatred by the non-Jews. Why do they hate us? What will we ever do to them? All we do is deliver their babies and keep them out of prison and do their taxes. The reason is because we're failing at our role. So it's a perfect system. What happens is our job is to be a light to the nations. If we, God forbid, fail at that task, it diminishes the light. In turn, the Gentiles then don't have a teacher, don't have a rabbi. They then turn against God. But how do you turn against God? By attacking Israel. It's just like photosynthesis. It's just like all the natural, that one triggers the other. It's a perfect system, and that's why the Jews suffer from Gentiles. And it's mida keneged mida. Why does God do it this way? It's not just a cute trick. It's to wake us up. In Judaism, the punishment always is something that should remind us of what to repent of. If punishments were just arbitrary and bore no resemblance to what we did wrong, we would never know how to fix it. That's why when people smoke, they start coughing. That's a good sign that your lungs don't like it. So God does is he causes us to suffer in a way that would trigger the proper repentance. And that's why it's it's called systems theory. It's a perfect system where the winds blow the clouds and therefore it rains on land. Why are there winds? Because there's convection. Why is there convection? Because hot air cold air is heavier than light air, and hot air goes up, and that creates the turbulence. It's just marvelous. Tanakh, my dear friend, is so delicious. It's so beautiful. It fits so perfectly. It's better than the greatest mathematical equation because it fits. That's why I love math and Tanakh, because math is like perfect at my level. It's perfect at my level. I know when you go out there in the high levels of math, forget about it. I'm just talking on my level. Arithmetic is perfect. It's got to work. I loved algebra. I love the postulates of geometry. I love the way it worked because it fits. It's got to work. It's got to fit. And that's what Tanakh is. You will come to something that you don't quite understand. But boy, when you put that together, Tanakh just explodes with beauty, with light.
But I think that what you just said brings us to the modern Jewish state, the state of Israel, when many people say, okay, we want to be just like a normal, sane country, and we want to be startup nation, but according to what you're saying, the Gentiles don't want a startup nation, they want a Torah nation. And I think that the challenge is how to incorporate startup nation with Torah nation, because we don't want to give up the startup nation. We want to incorporate it with the Torah nation. We want to be Or LaGoyim along with the high tech and with the intelligence and with everything, yes?
I just want to give you a spin. There's so many answers to this, but I want to give you a spin. Israelis have been complaining for a long time is why does Saudi Arabia get the oil? Okay? Because for a long time we didn't know about natural gas or any of that. How come all these Gulf countries are loaded with money under the ground? You just drill. And Indonesia was like that, gold, silver, gas, everything. And Israelis go, well, how come we don't get the oil wells, right? And when Begin in the Camp David Accords gave up the oil fields in Sinai, that was the big thing. You're giving away oil wells to the Egyptians? What? Okay. The key was that we thought it was a curse, like the enemies have oil, we don't. But now we could say with certainty that if we would have had oil coming out of the grounds of Tel Aviv, money coming out of Tel Aviv, we would have never turned to technology. We would never turn to saying, you know what, we have to use our brains and export brain power and use our minds to think. And as it turns out, look what's happening to the Gulf countries. Their natural resources are running out. There's not an infinite amount of petroleum under the lands of the Arabian Peninsula. It's running out. They know that. Conversely, what Israel's exporting, brain power, know-how, and godliness, that's something that will never run out. It's like the candle. You can light an infinite number of other candles, and it never diminishes from the original.
So, in some part, the startup nation is basically promoting good to the world. In some way of thinking about it. Yes?
It's the Jew is the innovator in general. It's not that our educational system is better than China. I don't know that that's the case, but there's a reason why Jews win so many Nobel Prizes and in Israel wins so many Nobel Prizes. It's because Jews think outside of the box, and in the Far East, the idea of being subservient and serving the ideas of the ancients.
This is respect to authority.
Right, and that's why
Every
even though in Japan and in China and in South Korea, with all these brilliant students, mathematicians and physics, but they don't win the Nobel Prize because they don't want to dare challenge from the outside. I'm stepping into your territory, but who is Albert Einstein? Who are these great thinkers? They're coming from outside the box and looking in, and sometimes you have to be willing to challenge what was Newtonian, just think on the different circumstances and stretch things that were, and you can produce these great ideas in the early 20th century. So that's what Jews do. We're able to challenge the system and rethink it. And it's not that Newton was wrong. It just, he didn't take into consideration all the possibilities because Newton never moved faster than a horse. So that's all I could think of. Now we have time where people can be innovative. That's the mind of the Jew. The Jew always has to be innovative, think outside the box.
And we challenge everything, even the word Israeli is challenge God or fight with God. Rabbi Tovia Singer, thank you so much for your time. It was mind-blowing, so much food for thought. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that your wisdom and all the smart things that you do will find a way to the heart and brains of Israeli Hebrew-speaking viewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shalom, my dear brother. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to joining you again. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.